Right now, we are on the verge of a revolution in America. After 400 years of systemic oppression, enough has finally became enough. As we saw with the unfortunate murder of our good brother, George Floyd, Americans around the nation and people who are sympathizers around the world who have been oppressed are galvanizing, are mobilizing. We're on the verge of what I earlier said was a revolution. Now is the time for us to fight back. Now is the time for us to make our demands, and there's no letting up. The civil rights movement actually took 8 days to get legislation passed, and I look forward to being on this journey every step of the way.
Well, I think we are in a extremely dire situation in the country. It's extremely divided nation. I do want to suggest, though, that it is extremely sad what has happened to George Floyd and the others who have died at the hands of police brutality. But I do want to suggest George Floyd, even though we disagree with his death, we also understand that this brother was not a good brother. He was not a good brother. He's really not a person that we should be surrounding ourselves or wrapping ourselves around as a martyrdom. He was a very violent criminal, and he has a very large, evil past that has taken place. But yet, we still stand with the very fact that he, along with others, have died at the hands of police brutality, and it's got to stop, and it's got to stop as soon as possible. We got to bring this nation together like never before. We got to also stop making this an issue about black people and make this an issue about American people. We do know that black people have a 2 times higher chance of dying at the hands of the police, but I also believe that there's a way that we can come together like never before.
Hello, I'm David Grasso, and you're watching Bold TV. Today, we're discussing the nationwide protests against the killing of George Floyd by police. Let's hear from our panelists. First, we have Chivona Newsome, a candidate for U.S. Congress in New York and co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Greater New York. And joining her, of course, is Pastor Mark Burns. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Pastor, let's start with you. Do you feel like the protests are effective?
Well, I think the protest is effective in regards to the peaceful protests. I think that obviously it's not just a national movement; it is an international movement. You having, Black Lives Matter protests are in Paris, France, in London, England, and people around the world are protesting against the police brutality that they've received in their respective countries. So the protests are effective in regards to bringing light to what people of color have experienced for the last 400 plus years. But the protests, the message of the protests get lost once these organized organizations that have infiltrated the peaceful protests begin to loot and begin to burn cop cars and begin to murder people in the midst of this protest. The message gets lost immediately, and that's the problem with this protest. The memory of George Floyd, and not just George Floyd, but others who have also died, blacks and whites who have died at the hands of police brutality in this nation. The message has really gotten lost, and it saddens me to see that because again, what people are protesting about is an important message. And again, I've discovered that you have black Republicans, white Republicans, black Democrats, white Democrats, people from all on both sides of the spectrum of the aisle are coming together and saying what has happened to George Floyd is a problem. Will Smith, the actor, said it best: racism in America is not getting worse. It's simply just getting filmed. And people are seeing it firsthand what's taking place in this nation and what people of color have experienced privately, but been screaming from the mountaintops for help. And so, but are they effective? Yes, it is effective in a sense that people are talking about it. But what really bothers me is the fact that we're talking about it because a black person was killed by a white cop. But we're not talking about the 10 deaths that took place in Chicago this past Memorial Weekend. The 39 people were wounded in Chicago.
Okay, Pastor, let's give Chivona a chance to talk here. You are involved in the BLM movement. What do you say to people who say that, the power of these protests is being diluted by things like looting, et cetera, et cetera?
People like to focus on the looting to stray away from the message. A black man was murdered at the hands of a police officer. Yes, it happens to black people more, but it's American history to riot and to loot. If we look at the Boston Tea Party, no one was sitting around having tea and trumpets. It wasn't peaceful. When we brought democracy to Iraq, when we brought democracy to Afghanistan, there were tons of buildings burning. People would rather focus on the looting of a small group of people, of the infiltrators, than the masses raising their voice, saying enough is enough to police brutality and we need reform. America is a racist nation. We have a racist leader right now who's made racist comments as long as the press has put a microphone in front of his face. So we need to address that. The American people are divided because our leader chooses to divide us. Yes, racism existed before Donald Trump, but he's done nothing to make it better. I was on the ground in Charlottesville with my team, and he said those people were very fine men when Heather Heyer lost her life. Even his own former Defense Secretary Jim Mathis came out yesterday and said he was dead wrong for sending military to U.S. streets. I was on the ground in Minneapolis when he told them to get tough and send military police after us, that the National Guard wasn't enough. It's our constitutional right to speak up, and rioting, unfortunately, is a casualty of war. And it's what's needed, it seems to be, for this revolution.
So, Pastor, what do you think about people who are conflating the protesters with the rioting? Is looting ever permissible?
Absolutely not. It's not permissible. I mean, of course, it's not permissible to loot. It's never okay to burn up buildings. It's never okay to steal from not just white businesses, but also black businesses, like the black former captain, that was the 77-year-old black captain that was murdered in the streets of the protest when he went to go check on his friend's store that was trying to prevent it from being looted, prevent it from being. There's a major difference from, and I agree with my sister in the sense that there's a difference, okay, in the protesters and the looters. These are two different peoples, and we really need to bridge that and really understand. No, it's never okay to kill anybody in the midst of there's no justification of it. I mean, we're talking about protesting for as she stated, our good brother, George Floyd, who was also a violent criminal, who pointed a gun at a pregnant woman, forced her back inside her house, and robbed her in her own home, okay, was convicted of multiple crimes. We're not diluting the fact that I'm happy that the officer was charged with second-degree murder. We're happy that all four have been charged. We're happy that justice, I believe, they will be convicted of murder and spend a very long time in jail and send a large message to the rest of police force that if you're standing by and watching your fellow officer commit a crime, you too will be held accountable. We're all in agreement of that. And I am happy that America has stood up and said we can no longer take that. But it is never permissible. It is never okay to loot. It is never okay to burn bridges. It's never okay to kill other cops and to kill other people who, I mean, we want to talk about Donald Trump as though he created racism. We want to talk about, I really like to know what exactly racist thing has Donald Trump said.
Donald Trump is an absolute racist since the Central Park Five. For the last 4 years, and with your assistance, he has been rallying his base and has not taken a step to unite our country. A fish rots from the head. And unfortunately, Donald J. Trump is our head. To call protesters thugs before the looting even began, to unleash the military on the country, it's nothing this man is doing but dividing our country. He called people very fine people white supremacists. How can you or anyone else who is reasonably intelligent back his practices?
I want to know from each of you, and we'll start with Ms. Newsome, what institutional changes do you think need to come out of this era? And we'll end with you, Pastor. Go ahead.
Well, Martin Luther King, he said it, I'm paraphrasing, I can't make a racist police force love me. Their creation was used under the Fugitive Slave Act to capture my people as property. But we can't create laws that stops them from killing people. So before I left for Minneapolis, we actually released a statement at Black Lives Matter Greater New York calling for something called the I Can't Breathe Act. We asked all state governors to sign this into law, and it states that if an officer denies you medical care, as we've seen with Eric Gardner, as we've seen with the good brother George Floyd and Andrew Kears, how they cried out screaming, I can't breathe. If an officer denies you medical care and you need medical attention, that's a Class 8 felony. Now, if you die in custody from an officer, as we've seen with George Floyd, when he screamed for his life for 8.5 minutes, or maybe a little bit more, that's automatic murder. If people weren't rioting and protesting, we'd still be sitting around waiting for an interdepartmental charge to happen. So we need absolute legislation to protect Black people in America. If we didn't have legislation in America, me and the good pastor wouldn't be sitting here. We would not have the right to vote. I would not have the right to run for Congress. So to protect Black people in America, we need laws to hold police accountable and to punish them as we would a regular citizen. We also need to get rid of police unions because they've gained far too much power, and officers need to be licensed. So you can't move from state to state seeking a new job if you are a terrible person who's horrible at his job and abuses his privilege.
Okay, Pastor, what institutional changes would you like to see come out of this era?
Well, I agree with my sister in the sense that this protest has to turn into policy. If it doesn't, then we lose. OK, I still disagree with her calling, George Floyd a good brother, because he wasn't a good brother, but his life mattered. His life was he was a person, and he did not deserve to die at the hands of the police in the way that he did. And billions of people seen this man take his last breath, just like other brothers and sisters, Black and brown people, but also white people. You also got countless of numbers of white people who have also been killed at the hands of the police, who were killed unjustly. So we cannot ignore as though that those lives don't matter the same. But we do know, again, according to Harvard, a black male is 2 times likely to be killed at the hands of police. So we understand that there's a real problem. And so, in other words, this protest has to turn into policy. I 100% agree with my sister. This has to turn to a policy that protects, American citizens. What I am doing is setting up meetings, or at least I've attempted to set up meetings with the U.S. Congress, U.S. Conference of Mayors. This is a state level matter. This is a local city mayor matter, that the mayor of all of our cities across the country, any president, whether they're Democrat or Republican, will have a hard time forcing a mayor who is in charge of the chief of police to do or implement any policy. So we have to really interject on the local level. And we got to convince these mayors to implement new policies that make sure, number one, we don't want to handcuff the police. We want them to be able to do their jobs, but we want to be able to isolate bad apples who have made it difficult for integral police, men and women who wear uniform, to do their job, without without feeling as though that they're going to become the next racist, famous person that we all talk about. As long as they're doing their job with integrity, as long as they're doing their job with decency, and they're protecting and serving, we have to implement policies to weed out these bad apples. This gentleman had 18 other infractions prior to this situation. Why in the world was this man still in uniform? Why wasn't there policies in place? Why didn't the mayor or the chief of police have them removed prior to the George Floyd incident? And these are situations like this that are countless officers throughout that have embedded themselves. People who should not be wearing the uniform have embedded themselves into the local law enforcement, and they're giving law enforcement officers a bad name. Those who desperately want to do the right thing, those who desperately want to serve their communities, and those who desperately want to make sure that they themselves make it home safely and quit using the color of our skin as a weapon, meaning that quit looking at Black people as immediate threat, and start realizing that we are doctors, we're lawyers, we're teachers, we're mothers, we're fathers. Even though George Floyd had a criminal record, and again, I don't agree with him being a good brother, but he was a life, and he had deserved to have his day in court. He did not deserve to die on the streets in Minneapolis. He deserved to have his moment in court. And I agree with my sister. If these protests don't turn into policy, then we all lose. America loses.
Well, thank you so much for being here for this important conversation. I really appreciate both of your time. And I'm glad that you both, agree that policy changes, substantive public policy changes, are needed to make America a better place to live for everyone. Thank you again, both, to my guests.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you all for watching. Have a great day.